the starting point for this discussion is, how did we even get here? How did we get to a point that our Prime Minister invoked the Emergencies Act, previously known as the War Measures Act? Now, to give context to the gravity of this, the War Measures Act was invoked only 3 times: during World War I, during World War II, and during the FLQ crisis. The Emergencies Act has never been invoked until now. So what is it? An act to authorize the taking of special temporary measures to ensure safety and security during national emergencies and to amend other acts in consequence thereof. Leah West, the Associate Director of the prestigious Norm Patterson School of International Affairs and the Assistant Professor for International Affairs, National Security Law, Counterterrorism, and Cyber Operations, has recently been featured in a CBC article regarding the Emergency Act. And she said, to invoke a national emergency, the government would need to be saying that these protests threaten the security of Canada, our sovereignty, or our national or our territorial integrity. I have real concerns, she says, about fudging the legal thresholds to invoke the most powerful federal law that we have. If you were to take home anything from what I'm speaking about tonight, I think it is that quote right there. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association said, the Emergencies Act can only be invoked when a situation seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada, and when the situation cannot be effectively dealt with under any other law of Canada. They went on to say, governments regularly deal with difficult situations and do so using powers granted to them by democratically elected representatives. Emergency legislation should not be normalized. It threatens our democracy and our civil liberties. So, back to my original question. How did we get to this point? Let's go back 21 days and ask, how did we get to a point that so many Canadians got so angry that they mobilized across the country, drove thousands of miles, spent thousands of dollars just to be heard? Protesting takes different levels of commitment. You can sign a petition, you can join a social media group, or you can mobilize. Mobilizing takes another level of commitment. So what has happened to make people so frustrated that they have mobilized across this country? I thought to myself, they must want to go home. So I asked. I stopped and asked one of the truckers, do you want to be here? Don't you want to go home? And you know what they said to me? Yes, of course we do. But no one is listening to us. I asked them how they were managing, and they said, pretty well. They told me this protest was nothing like Caledonia. They told me they've been working protests for decades, and force always escalates a protest. They said force never works for a peaceful resolution. They said the #1 thing that works is when protesters are heard. They asked me if I knew why the Prime Minister refused to acknowledge them. I told them I wondered the exact same thing. So just for fun, I thought I'm going to Google crisis management tactics, just to see what Google had to say. Of course, a top 7 useful tactics list popped up, and I'm going to share them with you. #1, tell the truth. #2, own it and speak from the heart. #3, have a plan. #4, provide a respectful response. #5, use the moment as a learning tool. #6, say the same thing to everyone. #7, take all stakeholders into account. Now, the Prime Minister has a lot more tools at his disposal than Google, and yet he still jumped to invoking the Emergencies Act before using the simplest of tools. I don't know that any of those 7 tactics have been used by the Prime Minister. Last Thursday, February 10th, the Conservative Party put forth a motion in the House asking for a plan. Communication, transparency. And the Liberal government, who's been over-speaking my entire speech and has no respect clearly for the House, voted no. Canadians want and deserve clear and transparent communication. If you don't want to listen to me, leave. On Monday, during a press conference, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "Some people will say that we moved too quickly. Other people will say no. We should have acted weeks ago. The reality is this. The Emergencies Act is not something to take lightly. It's not the first thing you turn to, nor the second, nor the third. So I ask the Prime Minister to please tell Canadians what the first, second, and third actions were that he took before invoking the Emergencies Act. I, along with the rest of Canada, is still waiting for an answer. The relationships that have been destroyed in the country may never be rebuilt. The division, segregation, and stigmatization has deeply and negatively impacted Canadians. There has been countless opportunities for the leader of the country to unite Canadians, but instead of bringing us together, our Prime Minister says things like this, quote, "They are extremists who don't believe in science, they're often misogynists, also often racist," said Trudeau. "It's a small group that muscles in, and we have to make a choice in terms of leaders, in terms of the country. Do we tolerate these people?" Those are the Prime Minister's words. This is a far cry from the Prime Minister we can quote from 2015 when he won, and he said, and I quote, "A positive, optimistic, hopeful vision of public life isn't a naive dream. It can be a powerful force for change. And if Canadians are to trust their government needs to trust Canadians." Where is that Prime Minister? Where did he go? Our office has received thousands and thousands of emails and messages from very scared and confused constituents. Some of the messages I've received today alone are the following. People are very concerned about the serious misuse of power and the overreach of federal government. One constituent sobbed on the phone that she's frightened and can't sleep because it reminds her of the October crisis. Another constituent phoned in because he feared he would be arrested if he spoke in public in our local community. People have phoned in very concerned that the Act is already being implemented and that this debate is purely window dressing. The general public is confused as to the extent of the powers and that there is no check on the government's implementation. People are afraid that their bank accounts will be frozen, not because they donated, but because they have supported the truckers on social media. Constituents are worried that if they donated even $50, that their account will be frozen and forever jeopardize their credit rating. What are the facts that make the government believe that the blockades are associated with the threat of serious violence for an ideological purpose? What is the legal basis for this extreme action by government?
No government should resort to the kind of extreme measures that we're seeing. Unfortunately, the Prime Minister has a track record of serious disregard for the law, and that raises a lot of red flags. This is the Prime Minister who interfered with an ongoing criminal trial in the SNC-Lavalin scandal. This is a Prime Minister who took the Speaker to court instead of fulfilling his legal obligation to provide documents to this Parliament. On 2 separate occasions, this is the Prime Minister who has been found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner. This Prime Minister admitted his basic admiration for basic dictatorships. Red flag after red flag after red flag. He may not like it, Mr. Speaker, but in Canada, civil liberties must be defended at every turn. Section 2 guarantees our freedom of association and assembly. Section 7 guarantees our right to life, liberty, and security of the person. Section 8 guarantees our protection against unreasonable search and seizure. Canadians can't be expected to simply take this Prime Minister at his word. His plans are not consistent with fundamental freedoms. The government should not have the power to close the bank accounts of Canadians on a whim. The Prime Minister is doing this to save his own political skin, but Mr. Speaker, this is not a game. It comes at the cost to Canadians' rights and freedoms. Speaker, Parliament should not allow the Prime Minister to avoid responsibility in this way. I urge all members of this House, proceed with extreme caution. Now is the time to stand up for your constituents, to show real leadership, to help heal our divisions, to listen to those we disagree with, to not shut them down, to not tell them that they are irrelevant, to not speak insults to them. That is the job of each one of us as members of Parliament. No matter who we represent, we have to represent them with integrity, with hope, with honour. And what the Prime Minister is doing, Mr. Speaker, he has for the last 2 years disregarded these Canadians, called them names and insulted them. It is time to show leadership for every one of us and say no to this Emergencies Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.